Peter, here's
Hi,
our
Dr.
CD.
It's my emails.
Okay, so we have to record, but I don't have them. Record to a cloud.
Recording in progress.
All right. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Rosenda Hendrickse. I'm an academic coordinator here in the Division for Postgraduate Studies. We are extremely happy to have Professor Rodney Dufford from the Cape Peninsula University of Technology with us again today. Professor Dufford is going to present to us how to construct a PhD by publication, as he had gone that particular route when acquiring his own doctorate a couple of years ago. So just you will see that that this webinar is being recorded. We will be about an hour. I'm going to ask people to just stay muted and to post questions in the chat should those arise, and we will address them at the end. What you must keep in mind is that we are not going to really deal with governance issues pertaining to the governance of a PhD by publication at UWC, but one of my colleagues, Mrs. Senecal, is present, and she had gone this particular route, and she may endeavor to answer some of the questions that you may have. So please just all stay muted so that we don't disturb each other during the session. Okay, so just a little background around Professor Dufford. He's very esteemed. Professor Dufford is one of those academics. I always tell new academics, front load your academic sort of profile, and this is exactly what Professor Dufford did, because he published very extensively before even becoming an associate professor or even acquiring his doctoral degree. So he is an associate professor of marketing at the Cape Peninsula University of Technology, our neighbors, and in particular in the Faculty of Business and Management Science. So he holds a D.Tech in marketing and has been teaching marketing communication related courses at undergraduate and postgraduate level for the past 25 years, probably longer, 26 years or so now. He has authored and co-authored over 30 journal articles, 35 conference papers, posters, and peer-reviewed papers. We have and a selection of his work can be found at the particular email address. I'm going to hand over to Professor Dufford, and I again appeal to everyone joining to kindly mute yourself. Okay, so welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just put my video on a bit. Hello. Started wearing glasses the last year as well. Too much time in front of the computer.
Yeah.
For the first time. And yeah, thank you for the introduction. I'm going to just if my internet was a bit wonky earlier on with overcast weather, so if it goes off, just make a noise. I do have an alternate internet that I can switch to, but I restarted, so I think it's okay now. I'm going to
Thank you so much.
share my screen. So if you can just tell me if I'll give it a moment that I think I maybe just stop my video as well for bandwidth.
Yeah, for bandwidth. Yeah. Okay, we can see this slide.
Okay, and you can see the full slide now.
Exactly. So thank you so much. Yeah, you can proceed. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Yes. Thank you very much. I'm just trying to hide this. Okay, we can move it to the side. So I spoke about a related topic last year at UWC and tweaked the presentation a bit, although I still need to give you the theory. So it's just giving all types of instructions here. Okay. So yes, as I'm introduced, Prof. Rodney Duffett, I'm in the marketing department. I'm associate professor. I also coordinate the research in our department. Um, if you want to see some of the work I've been involved in, I think I've hit 40 journal articles now, when 2 more get published later this year. So ResearchGate, Google Scholar. There is a YouTube video from last year's presentation, and this is the link. And when I send the PowerPoint later to Prof. Hendrikse, I will also probably, I'm also recording this, so I'll most likely upload this video on YouTube and I'll update the link. And there is a little paper that I've written on this topic on ResearchGate. So you'll be able to, yeah, if you want some additional resources. And at the end of this PowerPoint presentation, yeah, you can see additional resources. So there's just a lot of these things. I'm not sure, hiding a bit of my title, but that's fine. So what is a PhD by publication? Well, firstly, it's also referred to as, sorry, I'm just going to try and move some of these things that are, yes, to a better place. There we go. That's better. Yeah. So it's also referred to as a thesis by publication or thesis by article. And at some universities, you can even do a master's by publication. So it just differs from university to university. A number of universities allow doctoral candidates to submit a thesis in the form of a series of published or co-published or ready to be published peer-reviewed academic journal articles that are prepared during their studies as an alternative to the traditional format thesis. This does not mean that you will still not be submitting a thesis. You still submit a thesis, but the format of the thesis is different, and that's really what we will be covering today, the format, but not the governance, because this may differ from university to university, but it will be more or less the same. Also very important, it's not any academic journal that you can publish in. Universities do receive a subsidy for the articles that are published, provided they are published in a DHET accredited journal. And from that they get a subsidy from the DHET. The accredited indices are DHET, Scopus, World of Science or ISI, IBSSI, Silo SA, there's a Norwegian index, and then most recently the DOAF index has been accredited as well by the DHET, which is good news for students that want to follow this approach, because previously it was it is still quite difficult to get journal articles published, but the DOAJ list is very extensive, and those journals don't have as much of an impact factor or as others, so they are easier to get published in. So that I wish I had that list available to me when I did my thesis, because it certainly makes it easier to get your articles published. And it's still DHET accredited. So just a tip, obviously you can't publish in predatory journals or journals that don't have this accreditation, because they're of no worth to the university and for anyone for that matter. You do want to be published in reputable journals, but that's another whole workshop by itself, so we won't go into that. Okay. So just some general guidelines. So it's a series of journal articles that form a unified piece of work and still make a original contribution to whatever discipline it may be. Journal articles included in the thesis must have a coherent theme. They must be related, so it can't be a piece of unrelated works of topics that have nothing to do with each other, and you just get 3 or 4 articles published and yeah, they don't make any sense, they don't follow on from each other, or they are not related at all. So that is very important. Generally, journal articles published prior to the commencement of studies is not usually permissible. Usually you need to register and then publish. However, last year I seem to remember the other prof was saying something, so you'll just need to check up at that at your university. But certainly from my university viewpoint, you can't publish a whole lot of articles and then register and then want to submit that as part of a thesis, but that may differ from university to university. The number of articles, again, this is a governance issue, also differs from university to university. From my university's perspective, you need 2 articles that are already published, and you need 1 article that is ready to publish. So you only need 3 articles, which is not great, but at the same time, those articles need to be substantial enough to kind of replace the content of a thesis, a doctoral thesis. So, most people have many more than the minimum requirements just simply to have enough content to sort of make up the bulk that is needed in a thesis. And also, the thesis is examined as a normal thesis. The same objective is to make original contribution to the body of knowledge, so it's examined as per normal. Co-authorship guidelines. So obviously the candidate or the student, the doctoral student, needs to be the major contributor for certainly most of the articles. Because obviously the other authors in the articles are usually the supervisors, so they are involved. They should be the first author as well. In other words, they have done the bulk of the work, and usually if you're first author, you are the project leader. So that is important. It's no use if you're second or third author for all the articles and you didn't take the lead, then whose research is it, yours or your supervisor's? So you should be first author and do the bulk of the work. It should explicitly state who and the extent of the contributions. So at our university, there's even a little form that you need to complete for each piece of work in terms of the percentage of each author and what elements they worked on. So again, it's the students' work that should be in a majority, not the supervisors or promoters. Articles that mainly describe other people's works are inappropriate, so you can't include other people's research, where you may have given your 5 cents worth. Again, it is your research. So the structure, and so this is kind of getting to how to construct and what is included, and this is pretty much, when I did my thesis, there wasn't really any uniform structure, and I tried to find examples from all around the world to eventually settle on a structure. But in general, this is how you arrange the thesis. And once I've covered this section, I'm going to go straight to an example, which was my thesis, which I did 7 years back, and go to the how-to before I go to the last couple of slides of the presentation. So the first chapter is pretty much a general chapter like you have in any other thesis. It mainly comprises of the introduction and the research background, which includes your research objectives, your hypothesis, in other words, a lot of the elements you include in your proposal, your research proposal, except it's, once you do your research proposal, you forget about it and you go to do your research and your thesis, and then you redo chapter 1 at the end with all the latest literature and information that you would have found since you originally started, which sometimes could be 3 or 4 years later. So how this differs a little bit from the traditional doctoral thesis chapter 1 is you have a much longer research methodology section in chapter 1. Usually you include just a little overview and then you have a full chapter in terms of your research methodology. But in this, you don't have a research methodology chapter, because each journal article that you have published or that is accepted or if is ready to publish will have its own research methodology section. So you would have included the bulk of information already in those journal articles. So in chapter 1, you do expand. So it's obviously much shorter than if you had a research methodology chapter, but it's a bit longer than what you would normally include in a chapter 1. So that is the major difference between a normal thesis and the other thesis. So that is important to note. In chapter 2, you would have a conventional literature review that provides an overview of the study, but it's significantly abbreviated. In a doctoral thesis, in a normal doctoral thesis, you can have 1, 2, or even 3 literature review chapters. And generally, my doctoral students have 2 or 3 literature review chapters. Here you would just have 1 chapter, which is much shorter, maybe 30-40 pages, because again, each journal article will have its own literature review. So you are not trying to duplicate information, by having a literature review chapter and then duplicating it in each article. You're trying to give additional information or an overview of all the articles information in the literature review chapter without necessarily trying to, you're not cutting and pasting the exact same literature from your journal articles. You want to give more an overview of your study that perhaps ties up all of the different journal articles that you've written and their literature review. Then the next chapters are all of your journal articles. Now, these journal articles are written according to the style of the journals. So each journal article generally doesn't have to include all of these sections, but usually has an introduction, a literature review, methodology, research, results or findings, discussion, implications, usually theoretical and practical conclusions, and reference lists. Some people combine the results and discussion. Other people combine the discussion and the conclusions and implications. So that varies. So each journal article then forms a chapter. So you'd have chapter 3, chapter 4, chapter 5, chapter 6, if you've perhaps got 4 journal articles. And yeah, these journal articles, as I say, stay in the format of the journal, but generally you need to include numbering in them. So you're not just cutting and pasting, you're not cutting and pasting the exact journal or the off print from the journal, but you are inserting it into a Word document, so it's in Word, so that you can change the numbering, so that you can have numbering for each journal article. However, you leave the referencing as it is. You don't change the referencing, although I'm actually going to come to these matters afterwards, but I think it's worth mentioning. Yeah. So you insert the different journal articles, and that forms now the bulk of your thesis. So if you've only got 2 journal articles published or accepted and 1 ready to publish, you've got to ask yourself, are those 3 journal articles enough to create enough bulk and make enough of a contribution to your actual thesis? So for me personally, I did 7 journal articles. I know of other people that have done 9 journal articles. So it just depends on your topic, your discipline. Yeah. Then you can have a chapter 7, which could be your, this is just in this example. So if you've got 3 journal articles, it could be a chapter 6 or whatever the chapter number would be. But then you follow your discussion, is your discussion chapter. And the aim of this is to basically collectively tie in all your results together. In other words, to integrate all your results together to make a coherent and collective discussion of actually what you found. However, an alternative is that you could actually write another journal article that ties all these journal articles together. And sort of that is what I actually did, is I wrote an additional journal article instead of um, instead of having a discussion chapter. I wrote a journal article that tied in my previous 6 journal articles into a sort of a coherent discussion. Also, another good tip is to graphically depict each, usually research is based on a theoretical model. And if you're writing different articles, it would probably each focus on a different aspect of the model. So at the beginning of each chapter, you could have a piece of the model to start off, to show what parts of the model this article dealt with. And then in your discussion chapter, you could include the full model that shows how all these different articles fit together. Yeah, and I'll illustrate that because I will leave this slideshow after the next point, and then I'll actually go to a thesis as an example, and I'll go through to illustrate everything I've said, and then I will return back to the PowerPoint presentation. And then lastly, you usually have conclusions, recommendations, implications, limitations, directives for future research, especially if these are not covered in your articles. And you could again tie in all of the different conclusions and recommendations and limitations, implications in your article. You provide an overview of it here without trying to necessarily repeat everything, but you would provide a collective overview. So I'm going to stop the presentation here, and I'm going to share my screen to go to an example. Let's go to that example. Okay. Just to confirm that you can see, it's a Word document. The top is social media as a marketing communication channel.
Yes, Rodney, we can see that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. So this was my thesis. The title was Social Media as a Marketing Communication Channel Amongst Generation Z, or at least Y, sorry, we've moved on to Z now, but a new paradigm for the hierarchy response models. So my theoretical model was the hierarchy response, mostly the hierarchy effects model. So it is very important that your thesis and your articles, and increasingly at universities, the theoretical framework or model in which your study is based has become important, as well as your conceptual framework. In other words, your take on whatever the model is. So you have your title page, your declaration, or whatever the case may be. Your abstract follows the exact same normal format of a thesis. Your acknowledgements is a normal sort of frame. A lot of theses have a preface or preface, where you can give an overview of each chapter, and particularly in a PhD by publication, it's maybe more important to have this than a regular thesis, because as we'll speak about it later, examiners are not very familiar with this format. Most examiners that receive such a thesis to examine is the first time they've seen it, because it's not commonly used, but it is growing in importance. So introduction and background, you can you can even explain, please note that repetitions of comparative methodology occur in chapters 3 to 9, but they were limited during the editorial length for each publication. However, the research endeavored to utilize, broad to replicate, but, to provide information in a different way. So you can explain what you've done. This will just help the examiners and the readers understand a PhD by publication. Then, literature review, overview, and then each article that you publish. So you can say the article was published on this date in an internationally accredited journal. You know, all the tables in chapter 3 for form coherent parts. So you need to renumber or label the tables. If the tables were listed in your article, table 1, then in this chapter it would be table 3.1. So, you know, but the language in, for example, in this article, it's US English. You don't change the language in your thesis. You just insert it as it is. So you're only basically changing the numbering. Um, yeah. And then the next article, when it was published, where it was published, you know, also US English. The tables were also, you know, renumbered. The next article published, you know, the 20th of July. The next article, you know, accepted. So if it's not published, you state it was accepted, or it's a ready to be published article that you haven't submitted yet. Particularly if you're running out of time, like I ran out of time. I only did 7 articles, but in reality, I could have done 20. But you know, you know, it's, as we'll speak about later, it's not so easy to get journal articles published. And then the next article was published, the next article, and the next. So you explain. Then you can say that this article was published, blah blah blah, renumbered. Um, Okay, but you could say that this article is in lieu of the discussion if it provides a summative overview. So I opted to call my last chapter Discussion, Limitations and Directions and Conclusions, because most of the discussion was in Article 9, which combined the previous 6 articles. So yeah, you can just say what you did. A concise summary of the 7 articles are provided in this chapter in terms of limitations, conclusions. Hence, the 7 articles already largely summarize the study. So without needless repetition, this chapter attempts to fill potential gaps in the research. So again, you don't just want to repeat things, you want to add to it and combine it. And then you can say summarize appendices, right? Then very important is that you could include a table with the journal credentials. Now, as I said, you can't just publish in any journal, and this is again for the examiners to show them that these are DHET subsidized journal articles, and you can give all the indexes. You can even give your metrics, how many reads you had at the time. um, you know, so this article at the time when I submitted the thesis already had 7,000 downloads, and I can tell you now that this article's been downloaded, I think it's 120,000 times, and has, you know, 500 citations. So it's amazing how time goes and how things grow. Of course, I can't get back into, I want to publish in this journal again, but they've got a new editor and I can't get back in, even though my article's their top article they've ever had. In terms of publications, citations, I can't get them to accept another article. So again, journal choice is important. And so the credentials of all of your articles, how many reads you've had on ResearchGate, or um, you know, on this time I was just not much, because the articles had just been published, and you know, Google Scholar and things like that, and citations, if they were cited, you can put it in because it adds weight and credibility to your article. I wonder if I can hide people's videos. No, people have got their videos on. It's a little bit distracting, but that's okay. Um, so it sort of adds weight, as if your article's been downloaded and read a lot, and the indices, again, for when your thesis gets examined, they can see, oh, okay, there are accredited journals and people are downloading and reading it. At this stage, I didn't have citations or anything like that. If they've got an impact factor, include the impact factor. You know, that's very important to include this. I know this journal's impact factor is like about 5 now. So yeah, so include all that information. Then you get to your regular table of contents, you know. So that's regular. You can see now in this table of contents, you know, you give the usual research problem statement, the background to the research, research questions and objectives or hypothesis if you had. I was still a baby researcher when I did this. I still am a novice researcher, but I probably now progressed to hypothesis, but research questions and objectives were enough, 7 years ago. Then you can see the research methodology is not that long. It's 20 odd pages long. But yeah, it's sort of abbreviated to what you normally have in a doctoral thesis chapter, in the delimitation, significance, and summary. You don't have a literature review because your next chapter then is an abbreviated literature review, and this literature review is only 35 pages, whereas in a doctoral thesis you could have 3 chapters of 30 pages or 20 pages each. So it's shorter, it provides you an overview. And then you go to each journal article, which now in the journals, you've changed the numbering to match the chapter. So this is the first article, so 3.0, the abstract, 3.1, 2, 3, you've changed the numbering to fit in with the thesis numbering. That's the only thing you change, not the content. And you do that for each journal article. You've just changed the numbering. Then your references, your list of figures. So again, the figures these figures weren't in the journal articles, but I've added them at the beginning of each journal article to show which aspect of the model it relates to. So this is the cognitive part of the attitudinal model, affective, behavioral. Then it's cognitive, affective, behavioral, and then this is the whole model together. And then sort of an overview again. Then a list of tables. So, again, these tables were included. 3.1 was probably table 1, 2, 3, 4 in the journal, but now in your thesis, you just have to renumber them. Yeah. And then your appendices, so that's the usual clarification of terms, is the usual kind of format. And then you start with your chapter 1. But let me just move this to a different side. So if we now go to your first journal article, it's just nearly there. Let's go down. Okay, here we go. So here's the first journal. So you would say chapter 3, journal article 1, you give the title of the article, whatever it was called, and now you can just explain briefly what journal article 1, what it's about, examines the cognitive aspects of attitudes in terms of generation Y. So you show, here's your model. It's the different attitude phases, which has to do with attitude towards advertising. Here's the hierarchy effects model stages, and here's the different social medias. I looked at Mixit back in that time, and I just made it in time because the next year after I finished the thesis, Mixit was no more. The reason I chose Mixit at the time was when I started the research, it was the biggest social media platform in South Africa. It was much bigger than Facebook. And unfortunately, so topic selection is important. I obviously collected data on the others, not Facebook. I also collected on YouTube and Twitter, and Instagram didn't really exist then. On other big ones, even BBM, which also doesn't exist, BlackBerry Messenger, was also big then, but that's also disappeared. So just be careful of your topics, particularly when dealing with social media. I'm sure there's a million people that have topics on COVID-19, and yes, COVID-19 is still here, but the focus has sort of, diminished. So yeah, topic selection important. Anyway, I just made it with Mixit. I got all my articles published, and then the very next year, Mixit, disappeared. So here you can show specifically what parts of your theoretical model, this is my conceptual framework, that you cover in this article. And then your abstract 3.0 as it appeared in the journal article, even with the American spelling, and you just renumber it. So maybe it was called 1 in the actual thesis. Now it's 3.1, 3.2, add research questions, your literature review, just change the numbering. The table, is now table 3.1 instead of table 1. Your results, you just change, the table. So I just wanted to show you that. And then just to go down a bit more, you can see then also in this specific journal article, you also maintain the reference list. So in this referencing, they had their articles numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's just how this journal did things, and with brackets, and it's different to our university's format, but you maintain that format, you don't change it. Then you move to your next journal article, and again you show, okay, it fits this part of the model. And again, the referencing, you just maintain. Again, it's another style. I think it's APA, this style. So you just follow that style, you don't change it. Then the next journal article, and again, where it fits in the model. And so you carry on with all of them. Then you can see this also, this article 8 had a very different style of referencing. So you just maintain it. Then chapter 9, journal article 7. So you can just say, in this article, all 6 steps of the hierarchy model are covered. So usually you could have a discussion chapter, but here we're covering everything: the cognitive, the affective, the behavioral, all the hierarchy effect stages. And they're not Facebook and Mixer, but you're covering social media in general, which actually is these 2 elements. And so it's a combining everything, and as a result, you can see combining the results of all the other studies. And if you see the tables, then you've got overall. So this is the contribution to the overall, where these 3 were a combination of the Mixit and the Facebook findings, which you combined. And yeah, so it's all the levels. It's a summary of it. And then you get nice big tables like this showing the different significant levels of all the different levels. So, which is what your discussion chapter would follow. And then if you go to the final chapter, just scroll down. I don't want to use the side thing because it moves too much. Then discussion limitations and directions and future research. So your introduction, you kind of summarize the different hierarchy response models. So you're referring to different chapters here. So communication effect, you refer to different chapters, and it's a summary of everything, a summary of all the different means and significant levels for the different stages. And so yeah, you're integrating everything. Right, let's just scroll down a bit. And then you can also do big tables, which is kind of probably a repetition from chapter 9, but yeah. And then at the end, you can again just reinforce that you did in the beginning. Summative integration of the journal articles. You could give the scope of each article, the methodology, and the key findings, just so that the reader knows what's happening. And then you can draw your conclusion from these different articles collectively, and then your references, which will be a lot. These references, your reference list in the thesis, by the way, this is very important, very important. So here's references for the thesis, not for the journal articles. So in other words, your chapters, my chapters 3 to 9, the references were already given in the body of the thesis. So these references are only for chapters 1, 2, and 10, okay? Because chapters 3 to 9 were journal articles, and you included the reference list in the body. So these references were just for the actual references from the thesis, from your chapters 1, 2, and 10. And this is done in whatever your university's format is for those references. just say it's not exactly the same for each university. And then at the end, you could actually just give the first page of each journal article or the first 2 pages. And this is what it looked like when it was published, so they know. And the next journal article. So you actually, or if it was accepted, you can say this article is accepted. And the next article is published, the next article is published. Um, and this article was also accepted. So you put that email in to show the examiners that accepted, and then it was just the questionnaires and your permission letter. I got permission from the Western Cape Education Department to collect information from colleges and schools and stuff as well, which I actually even never really got to that. I did this research in subsequent articles, Generation Z, because I wanted to do Z and Y, but I ran out of time. There wasn't time to do separate articles for Z and Y. So I had to just do Y for this and then carry on with Z for my own research afterwards. So if I close that, we'll just go back to the PowerPoint. Will only be 5 more minutes longer, and then there'll be 15 minutes for questions. Okay, just to confirm that you can see the PowerPoint presentation again.
Yes, all good, Rodney, thanks.
Thank you. So, yeah, typical formatting. I've only got a couple more slides to go. So the technical presentation of the thesis must adhere to the university's formats. I just said the journal articles must be retyped or copied and pasted to form a continuous pagination or flow, and the numbering of the thesis like I showed you. Inserts of copies or off-prints published is unacceptable. So you can't just include the journal articles as it was published. You need to include it generally as text and renumber, but it could differ from university to university. Journal article referencing follows the styles of the chapter 1, 2, 7, and 8 university styles. The journal articles follow the journal article styles, as I've already mentioned. So the chapters, 1 in my instance was 1, 2, and 10. In this example, it would be 1, 2, 7, and 8. That would follow the university style. Advantages of PhDs, and this is just in quick because it's not how to create it, which I've showed you. Obviously, it enhances your employment prospects because you would have got a significant number of articles published, and universities are looking for that. It's also professional training because you would have received multiple revisions from journals, so you've learned a lot from that, and it develops you as a researcher. I've developed hugely going through this process. You learn to be able to respond to criticism, and you've got to face a hang of a lot of rejection. So some journal articles you get rejected 5 times. But if they give you feedback, take that feedback on board, use it to improve the article, and then submit to the next journal. And so you develop a thick skin. Additional feedback and external from your supervisors. So your supervisors get so close to a topic that eventually they just can't see things, because they've been busy with this thesis with you for 3-4 years. So this is independent feedback from the journals. So the reviewers are actually serving as additional supervisors and giving you feedback and guidance to improve your journal article, and they're highlighting what's important really from an industry perspective. Accept a journal article satisfactory standard. So if your articles get accepted, it shows that obviously depending on the caliber of the journal, that you're at a certain level. The greater the impact factor or the of the journal, the more weight it gives to your research. So that's why journal selection is important. But again, the whole journal and writing of articles is a different topic. It also gives you clear milestones as well. So you submit, you resubmit, it gets accepted, it gets published. So it's motivating when you get an article accepted, and it's even more motivated when it gets published. And it's even better when you see people are downloading your article and citing it. And then articles divide the research into distinct sections. So yeah, so once you finish one article, while you're waiting feedback from the reviewers, you move on to the next. And then when you get feedback on that article, you go back to it. So yeah. Challenging factors to consider. So just a few points. Uh, does your research project lend itself to PhD by publication? It's difficult to achieve the stipulated number of publications in the time you have available. That is, I ran out of time. I could have done far more articles, but you just run out of time. So that is a problem, and journals sometimes take a long time to get back to you. But you also need to consider the topic and the theoretical underpinning may not be conducive to split up your article into, they call it salami slicing, or pizza, to slice up your research into little pieces. It just may not be conducive. The methodology or field work also is a factor. If your field work, sometimes it takes 2 years just to get ethics. So again, time is a factor, and is it longitudinal research? How long is it going to take to collect your data is another factor that you need to, and then you've still got to write it up. And so again, time. And then specific disciplines may be more difficult. I think business is actually easier because you've got many, many more journals to select. Will the examiners be able to examine the originality of the candidate's contribution? So supervisors are very involved usually in the journal articles because their names also appear on journal articles. I don't want my name appearing on, a paper that I don't think is, basically good enough or going to appear in some journal that I'm not happy with. So supervisors may end up writing much of the articles to enhance their academic reputations. And then it becomes difficult for the examiners to assess what contribution the candidate has actually made. Yeah. And also some examiners may not have previously, examined a PhD by publication and give you negative feedback. So that's also a factor, but that shouldn't be a factor that you should worry about whether you're going this route. So therefore, it's important that the contributions to each article are mentioned somewhere. Is PhD publication an easier route? The answer is certainly no, in my opinion and personal experience, because of all the rejection you face. And it's independent. It's not now your supervisor saying no, no, no. It's independent people. But you need to kind of learn from it. Journal articles, editors first screen submissions and can afford to be selective because some of them receive 5,000 submissions a year and they can only publish 50 a year. So they desk reject a hang of a lot of research and they only accept the most innovative, unique, and original contributions. So you may become frustrated and disheartened. And all these rejections, but they help grow you and get you to become stronger. As I said, though, it has become much easier because now DOAJ journals are now DHET accredited, so it gives you a much greater option of journals to select. And then I think this is my final slide. It's very important that doctoral candidates learn from editors and reviewers' feedback. And I had some good editors that gave me a lot of feedbacks and they were developmental. Instead of just desk rejecting me, they gave me tips and allowed me to resubmit to them, the editors, several times before they even sent it to the reviewers. So, you make the appropriate revisions, resubmit either to that journal or to another journal if they've rejected you. And after 4 or 5 revisions, your article is looking completely different from when you first wrote it. And that means you completely different because you would have learned. So you learn to develop resilience and persistence. And you learn to deal with constructive criticism. And this is also going to, so if the examiners of your thesis later give you criticism, after you've got 5 articles published, that criticism is going to be nothing and should be easy to address. And really, constructive criticism, you can't take it personally. It's just part of the whole learning process, growing you. And then just to finish off, there are lots of resources which I took information from, and also my thesis. If you want an example, there is a URL that you can use. Okay, I'll stop sharing, but let's just share screen again. Sorry, I don't know what happened there. Just go to the end. I'll just leave it in this small. So there is the URL of my thesis at the end if you want to see it as an example, and other resources. I did like a writing for publication workshop, so there is a YouTube video you can go, and there's a ResearchGate paper to help you if you're just starting to write journal articles. That's a whole entirely different workshop that I've done, but there's resources available, and other resources with all their links, so you can go to those. Yeah, I think that's all from me.
Thank you so much. That was quite informative. Thank you, Professor Duffett. So what my colleagues have done, they have started to answer questions in the chat, and that sort of relates to governance at UWC pertaining to a PhD by publication. So I'm going to see if there are any other questions. Students can raise their hand. But I just wanted to ask you a question in terms of, so yes, it's important to take cognizance of the journal that you select because of the turnaround time of journals. I know I submitted something last year, February it was accepted, but it's only going to be published now in September. So I think that is important. And then the other question, Professor Duffett, what about the page fees? Because students, will your supervisor pay that? You're fortunate, you were an academic when pursuing your PhD, but who pays the page fees, for example?
That's a very, very good question. So yeah, we kind of had a funny arrangement with my supervisor. He just left me. I just said, you're my supervisor, but I'll never come to you for anything. I will just do it myself, and I'll give you my final thesis and you can just submit it. Because I knew what I was, well, I didn't know what I was doing, but, I was confident enough to go that route. But I think, for my students, personally, when they have articles, our university generally pays for the page fees, but now they're becoming more sticky about this, and they say, no, we need to use our research funds and things. So I'm going, well, okay, but then you've got to give me a bigger percentage when I get my subsidy. You can't keep me on the same subsidy then. So supervisors certainly can. Their names on the article, so if they've got research cost centers, they can pay for the page fees, but the student should never pay for the page fee. Or the university itself, or some faculties or departments, I'm not sure how it works at UWC. I mean, they're going to get the subsidy. It's like 130,000 Rand per article. So, if the page fees are 10,000 or whatever, the university is still going to make money. So I would firstly, as a student, speak to my supervisor and just see how that works in their specific faculty. And if their name's going to go on it, then maybe they could use their research fund. But it differs from university to university. Yeah. Other
Thank you
questions?
for that. Yeah, I'm just checking in the chat. There isn't any. I don't see any hands. But I think what you did was, I appreciate. I think we have to. I'll chat to you again offline.
Yes.
We may have a follow up because this was a great sort of introduction. Because I know I can see a lot of new PhD students joining or sort of at the beginning of this process. So you have taken us through from beginning to end. And I think a lot of students grapple with this. A lot of students think that they have now already published articles and they can use that. But you've sort of demonstrated that despite going this particular route, PhD students must contribute new knowledge to the discipline that they are in. Am I right, Professor Duffy?
Yes, yeah. So it can't just be a hodgepodge of everything. It needs to, so if you're a marketing student, you're not going to have a HR topic and a finance topic and a you know, it's you're and it needs. I mean, so I kind of probably didn't say this, but thank you for the question. Is that you create a normal proposal? Your proposal doesn't differ from a because you're doing PhD by publication. You write a proposal, and this is the topic you're going to research, and this is the theoretical model that you're going to use. But the difference is once you've written your research proposal, you're still going to then have to go and find literature and write literature um, and follow the normal processes. But instead of writing that in terms of chapters initially, you're going to go straight to writing journal articles. So you need to, as soon as you got your proposal and your ethics, you need to get your data as fast as possible. And then once you've got your data, then you need to start writing journal articles. So you still would have had to have done all the necessary background reading. And as I say, it's writing journal articles, and that's another whole, different workshop. There is a link at the end. I will send you the PowerPoint presentation. I don't know if I can upload it in the chat somehow.
You can email it to me. We'll send it to all the participants because they've signed up. So we'll disseminate the recording, and we'll appreciate your slides, Professor Duffett, and anything else you may think that may be of value.
Yes, yeah. So in the resources, there's a workshop I gave on writing for publication, which kind of takes you through the whole process of writing journal articles. I'm sure you've got many such workshops on your university. But the key is to start as soon as you've got your ethics, to get your data, and then because, as you said, you can wait a year for feedback from certain journals, and you've only got limited time, and that's your biggest enemy in this regarding how many articles you can get accepted in the time that you have available according to what your requirements are. So, yeah, yeah.
All right. Is there any questions? Any further questions? I see my colleague Janina Nanasia has addressed some of the general kind of contact information related questions. Last round, Professor Duffett is very busy sharing all his wonderful knowledge with us, and he's going to go into a real specialist now in terms of this and supervision in particular. So if there are, I don't see any hands, I don't see any more questions. I think, Professor Duffett, a lot of the questions that the participants or the attendees may have relates to governance of PhD by publication at UWC, and they can address those to us directly. So we thank you. We're not paying you, but you'll be surprised again by a little gift delivered to your door.
Not necessary, really.
But I appreciate this so much. This is, I mean, what you did, I'm still in awe because it's so hard to just write articles as academics. So having gone this particular route and getting so many articles out there is amazing. So thanks for always being willing to assist and for sharing your knowledge. And we wish you well with all your endeavors in the rest of the afternoon and the rest of the term. So third term, can you believe it?
Yeah.
So yeah, all right. So thanks so much, everyone. Take good care.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Rodney.
Thank you.
All right then.